The first thing you probably attempt drawing as an artist are heads. And let's be honest, we definitely all sucked, at least at the beginning. Your pages were probably filled with failed sketches of Dragon Ball or Naruto or Avatar: The Last Airbender characters that just didn't look right. And no matter how hard you tried, you just couldn't seem to draw heads correctly, even from a front angle. Either the eyes were too big, the nose was too short, or the general proportions just didn't look right. And even after finding the Loomis method, you still can't get it right. Yeah, trust me, even I'm getting flashbacks talking about this whole process. Anyways, now that I've reminded you of your struggles and probably traumatized you, here is how I practice heads. And yes, we're going to be covering everything from the basics to facial features and even ways you can add more depth. And I'm not trying to waste any of your time, so let's get into it. Alright, first things first, like anything you want to draw, we have to start with the basics. Now, one thing you have to understand right off the bat is that there are multiple ways to draw the foundation of the head. The three most common techniques I see people using are as follows: the Loomis method, the box method, and the paper method. Starting with the one you've probably heard every single artist on the internet, including me, yap about, the Loomis method. Which, now that I think of it, it's so popular I've already mentioned it in this video. Anyways, in order to draw a head using this method, you want to begin by drawing a circle. Very simple, nothing complicated so far. Unless you don't know how to draw a circle, then it might already be complicated. Then I want you to imagine you're chopping off the sides of the circle to create more of a skullish shape that we want for the head. Now from here, you want to identify your guidelines. One in the center of the circle for the eyes, and one around the bottom of the circle for the nose. Then from here, you can begin sketching the outline of the face using simple and curved lines. And there you go, you have the Loomis method. Now don't worry, I'll show you guys how to actually use these techniques to practice later, but right now I'm just making sure you're familiar with all of them. So next is the box method. Now this one basically gives it away in the name. All you have to do is construct a box using straight lines from whatever angle you'd like. Then for further guidelines, such as for the nose, mouth, etc., you want to use two intersecting lines so you know exactly where the middle of the face is. And that's really it for this method. The benefit of using this one over, I don't know, let's say the Loomis method, is that the box shape helps you identify the different planes of the face really easily, which we'll get into later. And now finally, the paper method. I will say, I'm not the one that created this method. I'm pretty sure another artist on YouTube did called Cynic, so shout out to Big Bro. And I'm not saying I created the box or Loomis method because I didn't. Anyways, the way I like to go about using this method is by beginning with a circle just like we did for the Loomis method. Then here's where it gets kind of hard to explain, but it's easier if I just show you. You want to kind of imagine wrapping a piece of paper around this sphere shape to create the curvature of the face. It should just look like somebody stuck a piece of paper on a ball. Then from here, you can add whatever guidelines will help you, like the eyes, nose, and mouth. Alright, so now that you're familiar with the general shapes and foundation for the heads, you can choose which method you prefer, by the way. Now we're moving on to the facial features. And I'll be honest, it's difficult to know where or how to position the facial features, especially from weird angles. But here are the ones that I usually use, and hopefully they're able to help you too. So for these examples, I'm just going to be using the paper method. What I like to identify first are where the eyes will go. So for the average head, they'll sit just in the middle, if not slightly below the middle of this circle. And it's actually useful to identify both the top and the bottom eyes using two lines to do so. This will just give you a better idea of how big to make them. The next facial feature you want to identify is the nose, which typically sits around the bottom of the circle, as I mentioned previously. By the way, I like to use this box looking shape so I get a general idea of how it's going to look. It also helps you so you know how wide it's going to be, as well as where to put the actual nostrils. And all you really have to do to identify the mouth is use a simple curved line. Of course, you can add more detail later, but these are just guidelines. Now, one thing that's super important to remember is that from certain angles, the facial features will actually shift and appear closer together. This is actually the case for both upper and lower angles, where the nose, eyes, and mouth all just kind of scrunch up, for lack of a better word. Okay, now at this point we've covered the foundation of the heads as well as where to put the facial features. But your head still might look flat, and I'm sorry to tell you there's no way to fix that. So that's gonna wrap up this video. Okay, but in all seriousness, we have to add depth to the head. Now you're probably asking, J Marin, how do I even do that? And there's a few ways you can go about doing so. So you first have to understand that the face isn't a flat surface, it has a bit of curvature to it. Kind of like how we were able to identify using the paper and box methods. But what if we're using something like the Loomis method? Yeah, the little oval shape on the side of the circle helps us, but what about the rest of the face? So what I like to do is use a wedge shape to create the eyebrow ridge. Look, with all faces, our eyebrows protrude from our face, creating a short hill above our eyes, which is a way to add add depth to our heads. And another way that I personally like is also straight up identifying where the side planes of the face are. So from this specific angle, we can use a curved line to indicate where the cheekbones are, as well as where the eyebrows end and things like that. It should mostly line up with the oval shape you drew previously for the circle. So what this does is it creates this big shape that I'm shading here that helps you recognize where the front plane of the face ends and where the side plane starts. Using these lines are also applicable to the box and paper method, almost as if you're chiseling away at a block of marble that you're carving. Think of yourself like a sculptor in a sense. Now hold on, there's something called same face syndrome in the art community. It's basically where literally all of your characters' faces look the same and have the same proportions. And this happens as a result of using too strict of guidelines, or you're just not experimenting enough with your proportions. Trust me, I've been guilty of this too. So what you can do in order to avoid this is experiment with different face shapes and proportions. And yes, I'm aware that I'm saying proportions a lot. Maybe the nose is longer and slimmer, or the eyes are closer to the nose and the mouth is far away. What you can also do is change the shape of the head entirely. Instead of using average shapes, you can manipulate, stretch, or shrink the facial features, including the chin and jawline, which I'd argue make the biggest difference. For example, the character that I'm drawing here has a much bigger jawline than usual, and his face is just also a lot slimmer. So if you're stuck and you just don't know what to do to make faces look different from each other, then you can use reference. Study how other people and characters look, specifically what makes that person unique. Is the nose a different shape? Do their eyebrows protrude from their face a lot, or are their lips bigger or smaller? You know, stuff like that. And if you're finding this video helpful, I want to let you guys know about my art course. The course contains 2+ hours worth of content that goes much more in depth with things like anatomy, general perspective, and shading. So if you're tired of struggling with your art, then I'd recommend checking it out. It'll be the first link in the description of this video. Alright, back to this lesson. So finally, how I actually practice drawing faces using these techniques. Because in all honesty, without practice, me showing you these different steps won't really help you. First off, I like to start by finding a reference image. Now this can be an image of a real person or a character from a show or movie, etc. I typically find ones that are from angles that I'm trying to get better at too. For example, this one's from a much lower angle since I want to improve in that area. So to begin drawing this head, I'm going to use one of the methods I proposed to you guys earlier in this video, and in this case, I'm using the Loomis method. You can see that I'm taking my time placing the basic shapes and lines down. And once I have the general silhouette down, I can move on to the guidelines. By the way, I'm constantly looking back and forth between my drawing and the actual image to make sure I absorb as much as I can for the proportions. So when I feel like I've got the guidelines down, I can start lightly sketching the facial features. Typically, I like starting with the eyes since they're a good indicator of where the middle of the face is. Then I work my way to the nose and outline of the face. This entire process takes time, but is absolutely worth it. If you consistently do this day to day and fill some pages in your sketchbook with practices like this, you genuinely will get better at drawing heads and faces. You'll feel more comfortable with harder angles and proportions in general, and soon enough you'll be able to draw even without using constant reference images, or at least will be able to lay down the basics of the head super easily. So that's gonna wrap it up for today's lesson, and if you guys haven't noticed, I'm trying to upload at least one YouTube video a week, which so far I'm not doing too bad. So let me know any suggestions in the comments of videos you guys want me to do, because I'm always reading my YouTube comments. I'm also thinking of starting a Discord art community, so if you guys want that, then let me know. But thank you guys for watching, and as usual, I hope to see you drawing.